Hello, everyone. It's awesome to have you back for another episode. And as always, I'm always looking for awesome, amazing people in the industry to bring their knowledge and share stories with you to keep you educated, keep you passionate. And, if you're kind of looking for another area to expand into, this is always a great, possibility for you to learn some new techniques. And I'm joined by an awesome legend in the industry. I'm somebody who I share the same first name with, which is also great. So welcome to the show. Welcome, Joe Grant, to the episode. You want to give the audience, I'm sure most people are familiar with you, but if you want to just give the audience a bit of background about you, who you are, some fun things, what you get up to.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, thanks for having me. Thanks everybody for listening. My name is Joe Grand. Some of you might know me as Kingpin, depending on how old you are. I guess that's sort of the delineator between generations. But yeah, I'm a hardware hacker and spend a lot of my time sort of exploring hardware and breaking hardware. But really, my passion is teaching. So I do a lot of traveling around the world, both public conferences and private events and teaching about hardware hacking and sort of trying to just dump my knowledge on other people and sort of see if they can hopefully get inspired by that and kind of build on that and just create more things and hack more things. So yeah, hacker is it's all I've ever known, and it's just I'm just lucky that it's turned into something that I can actually do as a career.
Well, that's fantastic. I think one of the things is, for me, I always, when I go into conferences and events, and I do a lot, I've done, you can see my badges in the background of tons of speaking, but one of the things I always, when I go to conferences, I'm always looking for people who inspire me and I get educated from or learn something new. So definitely always, every conference I go to, I'm always looking for you on the agenda to see if there's what,
Yeah,
and to make sure that I have the possibility to attend. And so
I mean,
all the times, it's always great. To your point is the education, and that's for me is that's what I value from going to the conferences to learn things.
that's exactly. I mean, we were talking right before we started recording. I happened to be in the UK a couple of weeks ago for something else, and a friend of mine was like, B-Sides London is happening, and I'm like, oh my god! So got to stop at B-Sides and see Iceman and see Daniel Cuthbert and see all these other people and meet a whole bunch of new UK hackers that I hadn't met, and just left that one day so charged, like to go back and hack on things. And just because you get to you sort of absorb this energy of everybody else's excitement, and that's what keeps me going as a hacker. Is you never know everything, and when you go to a conference,
Absolutely.
it's very humbling when you see all these other people with these amazing skills sharing things. And that's really such a fun part of it. So I'm glad that you're inspired by my stuff, and I'm inspired by lots of other people's stuff, and it's sort of this like giant snowball. I feel like that keeps growing.
Absolutely. For me, it's one of those things is that, there's certain areas that I look into and I try to learn, but it's the community around us that we surround ourselves with that, I won't not know everything, but I want to have the connection with somebody who can help me when I run into problems or challenges. As I mentioned, one of the things I got into hardware hacking was basically when my Proxmark broke. And I was just like, I was so frustrating. And it was like, I did a firmware flash and completely bricked it. And to the point where it was just like, oh no. And I knew I had a bus pirate sitting around somewhere. I thought, and then in order to fix the Proxmark, I had to update the bus pirate. And it was just one of those kind of, continuous things. And ultimately then, getting help from people around me that had wrote blogs or wrote information about how to take you through the steps to the point where I actually fixed it. And I was so happy with learning something new that it gets that excitement and passion again.
It's
Absolutely.
super satisfying. I feel like there's always, like, with stuff I work on, just like you said, if there's sort of this necessity of like, all right, I got to learn something so I can fix it. And it's the same thing with hacking of like, there's so many different ways to go and so many different things you can hack on, whether you're looking at hardware or software, network, whatever. Even within those areas, you could spend a career looking at one attack vector of one thing. So a lot of times it's sort of like, if there's some interesting curiosity of like, I need to figure out how that works, or, if somebody needs help with something, I'm going to now learn this new technique that I can use to help them. Yeah, I love that there's just this never ending pool to learn from and so many ways to go. Like, it really is never going to get old. I feel like, yeah, there's always something to do, and that's important.
Absolutely. And the way technology is moving, it's
Yes,
getting
that's
more and
right.
more.
Yeah, there's
It's
always new
accelerating.
technology, and then you end up with some of the same sort of security problems and failures, because as new generations of engineers and designers repeat the same problems, but then you also get this incremental sort of increase in new technologies to look at. And yeah, I mean, just thinking about 20, 30 years ago, uh, as a a young punk kid at the loft versus now, and how technology has changed so much, but a lot of the security stuff and sort of the hacking approach is still the same.
It repeats over and over again. It's just a continuous. And one of the things we were talking about earlier, was which we'll get into in more detail, was about your talk at DEF CON last year, which was the hacking time, which I and it's going to go back to the same thing that if you go back even when I started I started my journey was from gaming into hacking because
Okay.
I was from Belfast. I couldn't afford the latest games. I couldn't buy them new, so I was always
Sure.
finding ways around, whether having to type them in BASIC and get them to run
Yep.
myself,
Yep.
or having to find ways in order to slice and spice tapes and
Yeah.
trying to or changing time so that you would go back and the license would continue. So the same kind of things just keep popping up. It's just
Yeah.
sometimes a different format or a
That's right.
different platform and so
That's
forth.
right.
So what's your hacker origin? Where did you start? What when did you want to be a hacker to begin with, or did you kind of realize that after a while of doing something that you were a hacker? What was the kind of journey
Yes.
there?
So this, like, I got involved so early, I didn't know what a hacker was. The term hacker, like, it was used in the early 80s a little bit. Sometimes the media would call it cracker or whatever. Like, you'd have people that associated with hackers, but there wasn't real, I don't think, a very formal community. You had sort of still some subsets of hacker groups in the early 80s. And I got involved in 1982 when I was 7 years old because my older brother had a computer and I just started watching what he was doing. He decided to get more into music and
Mm-hmm.
didn't want to mess with the computer anymore. So I just took it over and just fell in love with having that machine to be able to interact with. And like you, I started with games. I would type in, basic programs from magazines. And I would connect to bulletin board systems and do war dialing, as well, but connect to bulletin board systems, find people trade games with, war dialing to find interesting systems as I got older, figured out how to make free phone calls so I could call bulletin board systems further away. And it was just this curiosity and something I don't know, I just really associated with it and so I connected with it in some way. And I remember like using some very early, I don't even know if it was a hex editor, but some program where you could modify, because a lot of the crack screens would have strings in there, and I would change the strings, but you wouldn't type in ASCII text. You had to type in the hex value for
Absolutely.
that. So I remember having a a highlighter pen is all I had, and I was writing, like, oh, it looks like if I change a 41 to a 42, that turns to an A or whatever it is. And I would write all those down, and then I would have it say, like, I was called Black Ninja, was my first name, and instead of hacked by whatever, it was like hacked by Black Ninja. And so that was sort of my first experience of kind of modifying things. But yeah, being a hacker, it wasn't. I had no direction. It was just what I love to do. And the older I got into my teenage years, the more I realized how abnormal my passions were compared to like people at school, right? Like I didn't do sports, I used a computer. And I started getting this power which I really loved, even though I didn't abuse it directly against individual people, but I knew I could. Like if somebody was giving me trouble at school or somebody I didn't like, it's like, well, I could, if I wanted to, pull your parents' credit rating and get your credit card and go shopping and cause you all sorts of trouble with your phones and everything, which I did cause a lot of trouble, but it was less focused on an individual, but I liked that power. And it just sort of progressed from there of sort of exploration. I really just wanted to be an engineer because that was a career path where I could design electronics and that was a defined path. Like being a hacker, being a cybersecurity researcher, like those terms didn't exist as a
Absolutely.
career.
Yeah.
And
It was just an IT guy.
it was an IT person who happened to do some security. Right, exactly. And the engineering side and the electronic side really fascinated me also. And I think because the computer systems at the time were easy enough to understand hardware wise also. So at the same time as writing programs, I was building electronic projects out of magazines and then modifying those. So it was just this natural progression. And I've never really had any other desire to do anything else. And I remember talking to a friend of mine who's a professional musician and travels around with a lot of different bands that I'm sure some listeners have heard of. And to see him, I asked him the same question. I'm like, how did you get involved? Like, when did you know that you wanted to do music? And he's like, oh, like, when I was 8 years old, as soon as I touched the piano, I knew. So I think it's a lot of us kind of had that passion, discovered it early enough where computing was so unique, where it wasn't surrounding us all the time. It was special and it was something that other people didn't have. And I just loved that. And then it went from there. But yeah, that was sort of the beginning of like discovering bulletin board systems and other people like me where I could interact with people but not have to be in person, which especially as a
Hmm.
little kid,
Yeah,
but it was just like this world that I had access to that I knew other people at school didn't.
absolutely. It reminds me of even when I was at school as well. One of my kind of things that got me going, because every day I'd go into the classroom and we'd have computer class, and I would go in, put charge everyone to put games on the computers, and charge them it's like £1 a game or something. So I
Yeah,
put a game on, and I'd be like £15 at the end of the day because 15 people in the class got,
that's
and
pretty,
then
that's a good racket. I used to sell ASCII art printouts of naked ladies when I was probably 10 years old for $2 a piece. And I had those hidden in my friend's house underneath his parents' computer desk. And one day they all went missing. So I think the parents discovered our illicit sales.
but it was for me that was exciting. You got into, and then the IT admin would discover all the games and delete them that night, and going, oh, how did they all get on? And then you start afresh the next computer class. It was like a clean
Right.
slate, and you
And
saw
you're
them
right.
all
You
again.
always, yeah. It's like having a
And
VM. You just start over.
and for me, it was a way to kind of fund my gaming passion as well. So
Ah,
that was a kind of way, because then to a point is the hardware side is my first computer was an Atari 800 XL.
okay. Mine was a 400. So
So
nice.
and it was, the reason for it was I used to travel, and one of the families I used to visit, they had an Atari 2600 gaming,
Yeah.
and I was like, so I wanted one, and I got asked my parents. I was like, I want an Atari 2600. And it comes Christmas Day, I was excited. Went down, opened up the box, and I'm like, what is this? This is not
The wrong
this is not
thing.
an
Yeah.
Atari
A
2600.
better, a better thing.
But it actually was, but it wasn't a game, but it was actually a computer. It wasn't a console. It was actually something. And for me, I think that was where I was about 7 or 8 at the time, and it was where that was for me. That was really what got me interesting in learning basic and learning the gaming. And to the point, you type in the basic code from the magazine, and it
Yeah.
wouldn't work, and then you find
No.
out the next
Yeah.
release of the magazine that there was a typo, and it was so frustrating. You get troubleshooting yourself. So, where did you transition to? From you want to be an engineer into the hardware side, because it's a very. I think what I remember was a lot of it was to do upgrades, to get a better sound card and graphics card and
Yep.
memory and disk space. That was kind of where in the hardware side. What got you more into kind of like looking into it in more detail, ultimately becoming your career?
Yeah, I'm trying to think if there was like a defining moment. I do remember, so one of my first circuit boards that I made was something called a ring busy device. So you could plug it into your phone line and you could still use the phone as normal, but if somebody tried to call your house, they would get a busy signal. So it
Okay.
was kind of a way of like, you could block salespeople from calling at dinner
Hmm.
time or whatever. But I thought it was awesome because I could use it to prevent my teachers calling the house to talk to my parents, or the telephone operator or whoever else, voicemail owner of some voicemail system we were hacking, whatever. They couldn't call, so they couldn't talk to my parents. And I remember building that, and it was just so cool to be able to use hardware to control something. But it ended up just being just like with computers. Like it was this natural progression of I was designing or I was building electronics out of magazines, and then I would learn how those were done, kind of like looking at code and modifying code. I was looking at hardware and modifying hardware. And then I started building my own stuff, sort of mischievous things. I built a stun gun. I built a high pitch sound generator that I built into like a little Altoids box, like a Mints box, and brought it into the classroom. This was, I think, sophomore year at that point in high school. And turn it on, and it would have this high pitched sound that would bounce all over the room, and nobody could figure out where it was coming from, which I thought was hilarious. I built like a laser listener system to try to pick up sounds that were hitting windows and reflecting. So I just started tinkering with things, kind of in this mischievous, because I had this mischievous sort of mindset, and I was kind of a troublemaker in school and outside of school. I was involved in skateboarding and punk rock and all these things that were not normal in society, which I'm just now learning sort of why I've gone into why I was attracted to those things. But the mischievous hardware was kind of the same thing. And as I got to be a teenager, I was doing credit card fraud, and I was buying, computers and reselling things. But then I would also like just build, I would also like clone cell phones. So I reverse engineer cell phones to figure out, at the time they were amps. So an analog kind of standard, in the US, where you had your ESN and your MIN, which is your telephone number. So you had those two. If you had those, you could reprogram those to another phone and then essentially sell that to a drug dealer or whoever, and they could use somebody else's account until that other person, the legitimate person, discovered that. So I was doing that in high school a little bit, kind of using my hacking, my mischievous hacking mindset with designing hardware. Again, knowing that I was going to be an engineer because that was the career path and I loved designing things. I'd always just, wanted to have products out there. And getting into a professional hacker came a little bit later on in that process when all of us at the loft started at stake, where that was the catalyst of like, okay, let's try to do this full time and then go from there. But it was really the hardware hacking started because I was designing hardware and was an engineer first in that case, but a hacker as well.
So what was the journey like from in the loft? Well, I guess that was the transition from it being a passion to somewhat being a career. To actually,
it was eye opening. I was the youngest of that group by at least 6 years, and I had joined the loft in 1992. So I was just turned 16 years old. I'd just gotten arrested for breaking into a telephone company building with some other people that I was in a different hacking group with, kind of nationwide hacking group. So that was sort of this peak time of my troublemaking, and then I got in trouble. And then the guys in the loft, who I was already familiar with from the Boston hacker scene, they took me in under their wing. And it really was this transformational period because I was still a teenager, but I was old enough to realize that what I was doing troublemaking wise was not going to lead me down a positive path. And when I got arrested, I was very, very lucky that I did not end up in juvenile hall, in the court system, and all of these things. I was the only one actually that was not charged because I was underage. Everybody else I was with was older, and some of them faced jail time, and it was pretty bad. So it was a real eye opener. The loft to me was such an important part of my life because I was a teenager in a very formative time. And now I had all of these mentors, whether they knew it or not. And I still talk to them. And I was like, why would you let a 16-year-old punk kid into the space? Like I never understood why me compared to other people. But it really saved me in a lot of ways. And it taught me a lot also because now I'm in a group that our only purpose of the group at the time in these early days was to have a hangout spot and mess with technology and explore things, set up our own networks and hack on them and play network Doom with all the computers. It was just a really cool place to go. And for me, a safe haven where I had somewhere to go. And these guys were kind of my parental guidance. And I learned from them when we would go to some meetups and some conferences, I'd see like, okay, Count Zero is giving a talk about this. Here's how he's presenting himself. Oh, there's, Brian Oblivion is sharing some information that he figured out with some other people. Just seeing that passion that they had of sharing information, like we talked about at the beginning, that really stuck with me. And it showed me the importance of being willing to share and being willing to learn and using your skills in a positive way. So it was such an important thing. And then in, a couple years in, actually it was 8 years in to the loft, we decided to start at stake to see if we could be hackers full time. And this was a crazy thing. Like at this point, there were consulting companies starting to do cybersecurity, but there still weren't hacker groups doing it. I remember we tried to negotiate with one large consulting company, and as part of this conversation we were having with them, we were like, okay, we're going to prove our worth by doing a pen test on you while we're doing negotiations. And they didn't really think anything of it. So like Mudge and some of those guys did some network hacking. I did some voicemail hacking, and we did some physical security stuff. But I ended up hacking the voicemail of one of the guys that we were negotiating with, leaving a message for receiving a message from the other guy we were negotiating with. So they were talking about us. And in the voicemail, they're basically like, well, blah, 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 stock options, we can meet their demands with this. But I still don't know about Joe and Brian, like the hardware guys of the team. They didn't know what to do with hardware hackers. And they're like, but if they're part of the deal, they're part of the deal, whatever. But we basically heard them talking all of this shit about us. Sorry if I'm not allowed to use the word, you can beep it.
I don't beep anything.
And the guys when they went to do this sort of meeting at the end about like, okay, here's the pen test review, and they played the voicemail back to these guys, and their eyes widened, and needless to say, the deal did not go through. But that's when we realized how different the corporate world was from the hacker world. From, they were looking for business, billable hours, blah, 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 where we were more like, no, let's do this. There has to be some element of this public service of finding vulnerabilities and forcing companies to fix them and letting, empowering the users, because that's what the loft ended up being about, of like, putting less trust in the corporations, because Well, we know that designing secure products is hard, and we tried to give them some time to like fix the problems. But a lot of times back in the day, vendors didn't want to hear it at all.
Yeah, there was missing accountability.
That's right.
They kind of, they weren't transparent and accountable for, and if they discover something, they would, try to minimize the cost aspect of it for as long as they could.
That's right. If they even acknowledge that it would be a problem. So that was something that people just didn't quite understand. So we met with a couple different people and eventually ended up joining forces with some venture capitalists that wanted to form a cybersecurity company, but wanted hackers involved also. And this ended up being At Stake, which is kind of the seed where so many people grew from in the industry. I didn't have a great time there, mostly because we went as the Loft from this very flat hierarchy kind of thing to an actual organization. I had and I have a problem with authoritative figures and people telling me what to do. And when it ended up being my friends telling me what to do, who are now the vice president of security, who's now telling, like, it didn't sit well with me and it didn't feel right. We did have a great time setting up the company, doing research, but ultimately, like every corporation, especially venture backed, they wanted billable hours to make money. And I didn't want to be a consultant per se because I knew what my skills were, and my skills are not in that consultant role. I like to sort of be shielded from that and do my work on my own in our lab. And it didn't end up working out. Some of the guys got fired from the Loft with really lame excuses, and the rest of us didn't band together and kind of support each other in that kind of unionized way, which we should have, of like, wait, why are you firing him? That's not right. We're gonna also leave. Like we just didn't do what we should have done as a group of friends, which I really regret still. But it taught me a lot. It taught me a lot about people, and it taught me a lot about business, and it taught me a lot about what I don't want to do and how I don't want to live my life. So 2003, I left. So 3 years at the company. 2003, I left and became independent and was like, I'm going to focus on what my ethics as a hacker and as a person. And I was young enough and dumb enough, I didn't have any responsibilities besides paying rent and eating food, that I could take some risks and like, I'm going to design some products and sell those. I'm going to give some talks at whatever conference. But it was still young enough and early enough in the security world where nobody really knew what was going to happen. I just didn't like the feeling of the big corporations selling security in a way that it just didn't feel right to me.
They kind of lose the sight where it becomes more about the revenue than actually solving problems.
Absolutely, yeah. And
it's always finding that balance. I think it's finding the balance. Being a researcher primarily is in curiosity and driving that passion, which becomes the career. And I think it's always finding that balance between where companies, it's really about they're there to make the world a safer place. And that it's all about making sure they're solving problems that people have. And then at some point in time, if, whatever it comes in, is they lose that insight. Because I was when At Stake, I was acquired by Symantec. I was at Symantec for a period of time.
Were you? Okay. Oh, wow.
So, and for me, I left because of that same reason, is that I had so many ideas. I was going to the CTO office, and I was knocking on the door saying, this is a problem that many people have. It'd be great to spend time solving this. And I remember at the time, it was like, we're too busy doing kind of structural changes that we don't have the time. Right. And that was, for me, it was like, you lose the sight of solving the real problems that people have.
Yeah, and we started off as, not to get too deep into it, but we started off as like, yes, At Stake hires hackers. And then, we were getting pushback from customers of like, ooh, but are hackers good or bad? We want, somebody in a fancy suit to come help us with security. So there was still this disconnect that the company didn't really know how to handle. And probably the best example is Dan Geer, who was our CTO at the time, an amazing person. He's been involved in cybersecurity since the beginning, way before us, or whatever it was called back then. More cryptography-based stuff. And he had written a paper warning about these dangers of monoculture, of relying on one individual company using all of their products. In this case, it was Microsoft. That was a groundbreaking paper that is still referred to today. But he wrote it while he was the CTO of At Stake, and Microsoft was a customer of At Stake, and he got fired because of that. He was basically
Jeez.
bringing to light a bunch of dangers with people relying on things that we're seeing today, right? Look at what happened
Yep.
with CrowdStrike.
With CrowdStrike, yep. Even though it was an IT issue rather than just for the security
That's
company,
right,
but
but
an
it was
IT.
still it was everybody relying on one thing, or a lot of these, what is it, Log4j, or like a lot of these massive problems that happen are because everybody is relying on one thing, and a lot of times there is no other option to paralyze with something
Yeah.
else.
Yeah, reminds me actually. In years ago in Estonia, we had the massive cyber attack back in 2007. It's
Oh
exactly
yeah.
the same scenario. Then it was that it was a massive DDoS attack, and so ultimately, the people were thinking about what's the solution, because in Estonia it was that the fear of land invasion. It's called the doomsday scenario, and at that point in time, they realized that the dependency on even the Estonian land was a risk. That was the actually land of Estonia was actually where the risk was. If there was an invasion, that's where you had the vulnerability. It's like the dependency that you have. You had to
Yes.
realize what's your dependencies, and that's when Estonia came up with the idea of data embassies to then move, because you couldn't go to cloud because the sovereign law prevented moving your citizens' sovereign data to cloud environments. So they came up with data embassies, decentralized the entire government in embassy
Yeah.
locations outside of the
Interesting.
country. So
Right.
you remove that dependency, because that becomes a single risk
Right.
that, how do
Yeah,
you
that's an
mitigate?
interesting solution. So yeah, it was an interesting experience for me. I had actually come from a professional engineering environment. So before we started At Stake, I was working as a professional engineer because that was my path at the time. When we all quit to be hackers full time, that's when we sort of, I think At Stake proved that security was important, and it proved that we could start doing security research. And we did give some talks for no other reason other than to share information, right? It wasn't that every talk was a logoed, branded thing. Like, we would write advisories for things because we could, not because we were using it in a customer project. But yeah, I basically just ended up going on my own. And that's when I started doing more hardware hacking and less engineering. And that just sort of came out of, I was doing some consulting work, but then it came out of like, wait, maybe I can combine these skills. And then ultimately it was Jeff Moss, the Dark Tangent. I'd known him since I was a teenager, and I did the early DEF CON badges, which was more electronic, exposing people to electronics. But then really when he started doing trainings at Black Hat, and was like, hey, you should do a hardware hacking training. That's really what set it off of like, okay, I can combine my engineering mindset, my hacker mindset, and people pay me to talk about stuff that I love. Like, this is the best thing ever. And I get to do some creative design work and teaching methods, different ways of teaching things to people at different skill levels and everything. And it just really like clicked for me of like, this is what I love to do. And I mean, I'm immensely grateful. I think a lot of us wouldn't be here without sort of Jeff's foresight way back in the day. Things have grown arguably out of control with how huge everything is, but it really I'd never, like, I was not the one that was like, I'm gonna start doing trainings, I'm gonna be a professional hacker. Like, it's always been, I feel like a lot of times somebody else may be planting a seed or suggesting like, hey, you should do this, or even my wife now, like,
Looking you
yes,
from the outside and seeing kind of your, let's say, the values that you have, and kind of passion in certain areas. Sometimes it's just that they see it from a different perspective,
that's right.
and be able to, say, and they might also have insights from other areas that they're seeing is growing, and see that you've got values that would be beneficial, there in the training side as well. So absolutely.
Yeah, and it is right. I mean, a lot of times, the stuff that I teach, I don't consider groundbreaking knowledge. It's just knowledge acquired in a way that maybe other people haven't. So when I go to speak to engineers, they have the engineering mindset of like making sure the product can be designed and working under budget and be released. Security, a lot of times, as we know, it either isn't thought about, or is tried to be patched on later, or whatever it is. So I just try to bring them that sort of mischievous side of thinking about it from an adversarial perspective. And if I'm teaching hackers or penetration testers, then I'm bringing in more of that engineering side of like, here's how an engineer has to design something, and here's how we can exploit what they have to do as engineers. Yeah, I mean, it's super fun, and I'm glad that I was eventually able to find something that I actually liked doing.
Still, my favorite badge of all time from DEF CON is the pendant, the one with the
Thank you.
stone. It was such a very different concept, and also was the wireless near field
Yeah.
communications.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
and it was that was definitely a
Yeah, that
very
was
different perspective on.
DEF CON 27. So that was a number of years. That was 9 years after I had retired from designing badges, which was DEF CON 14 through 18. I designed those. But then the Dark Tangent needed help, and he's like, "Hey, can you design the badge?" And I was like, "I don't know. It's so stressful." But we met, and like, he's a hard guy to say no to, and he's so passionate about it, and he had some great ideas. I got to try a lot of new techniques with engineering using his money, so I didn't have to take any risk. That was a really hard project, but I wanted to try to do something, yeah, incorporate some natural elements and a little more artistic. Like, I don't consider myself an artist. I'm a hacker, where I look at actual artists and I'm like, I can't even imagine how they did that. But trying to bring some of that artistic element in with the natural, the quartz crystal, and then the near field magnetic induction. Like, I'd always
Yep.
look for something new that I could learn from. Again, talking about motivation,
Yep.
doing the DEF CON badge was the motivation to try something new and learn something new. And the NFMI stuff was cool, and it was contactless, but it wasn't Bluetooth, it wasn't Wi-Fi, it was different. So I thought that would be fun to sort of expose the audience to. And yeah, I'm glad you liked it. It was fun to see everybody
It was
playing around with that one.
looking at the traditional way you've got it hanging, just seeing people's creativity about how they wear it was actually impressive as well.
Yeah.
So that was definitely one of my favorite. And going back to one of the things I kind of want to move into as well as some of the talks you've given. Again, my favorite of all time is the Colonel Con talk, which was which was watching you running around with soldering irons and trying to get the temperature up, and I think it was the heat gun.
Yeah, it was
trying to raise it.
Right, and that was the Colonel Con live. So that was, I think, during lockdown or.
It was during lockdown. It was where Colonel Con switched to doing the first virtual event. And then they had this kind of live session from morning till evening where the speakers would get 2 cards and you had to choose one, and each one would be a different challenge.
Yeah.
And it was so, I think the thing is that when you see a lot of people doing these types of things on social media, they're so edited and so cut that you don't get to see the thought process.
And it's very overwhelming because it's like, how are they doing this? Why are they so successful? You're right. You don't get to really see the truth about it.
And I think Colonel Con was actually showing the thought process about running into problems and then thinking about how do I solve that problem? And, rather than
watching you do it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it was even just watching you running around with the GoPros, trying to get the right angle and stuff.
it was awesome. That was such a fun experience. And I remember sitting there watching Chris Eagle do his
Chris was
reverse
fantastic.
engineering, sitting on the couch and like talking about being inspired. Like, it's because I've known Chris for a long time too, but to be able to see people in their element, it was so fun. So then when it was my turn, it was like, all right, I got to step up. And that was a wild challenge of like, all this hardware hacking and trying to explain it as I was doing it, and everybody's typing stuff. Yeah, very chaotic and super fun. And I loved how they delivered a pizza to me also as I'm doing it.
That was
it's
pretty awesome.
Hacker, it was really fun. And my kids got super jealous because they're like, why did Daddy get a pizza and we didn't get pizza? And I'm like, well, Daddy's hacking.
Is your kids getting into hacking or not? Or what's?
No, not really. They think it's cool.
Mm-hmm.
They're mostly aware of what can be done with hacking.
Mm-hmm.
They're aware of what, the dangers of the internet and the dangers of big companies harvesting all your information, and they know how to use Tor. They know about VPNs, but they're mostly like, they're into gaming, and then they just have their dreams of whatever they want to do, which is good. Like, I would never expect somebody to follow in my footsteps, but I can imagine it would be hard to, unless you love what you do, it would be hard to sort of follow that. And I like that they have their own dreams and their own goals, and like my job now as a parent is to just support that, right? Of whatever they want to
support them.
Support them, and the worst that's going to happen is they make a mistake or they fail. And I can compare it all to like, well, my son is 16 now, and like when I was 16, I was a mess and I had gotten arrested. Like, he's doing much better than I am.
I think it's a good person is that I try to keep some of what I was doing at that age a little bit private.
Yeah, they know everything. And the same thing with some friends of mine that had some like very dark times with drug abuse. We talk about that with our kids because they can see what happens, and luckily they've come out of that. But like those are lessons that they might not they might not listen to me directly,
Hmm.
right? So using examples of other things. But no, so they're not
Fantastic.
super into it. They do help me with like unpacking things and
Hmm.
setting up classes and stuff
Hmm.
sometimes, but no. I mean, they know I'm just a total nerd and I'm just in my office all the time doing something.
That's pretty awesome. Yeah, I actually I did move my office away from home just to make sure that I got
Nice, yeah.
this separated. So one of the things I loved was the talk that you did with Bruno last year at DEF CON. That was so much fun, and again, when I was watching it live in the audience, for me, it was just I was saying earlier that it reminded me of the Captain Zap time of
Yeah,
hacking
yeah.
time, and
Old
hacking time
school.
has been something old school, been a long time. You shared a little bit about kind of the whole build up of that talk and the research and stuff that went into it.
Yeah, so I think what's interesting about that mentioning from again, every hack has to be this groundbreaking thing, and a lot of times there's this expectation when you give a talk at a conference, it has to be a brand new 0 day something something something. What I was trying to do with that talk is show, yes, like hacking time, modifying time, and I'll explain that this is a decades old problem. And we're still seeing it come up in different ways. And just because we're not doing something groundbreaking doesn't mean it's not important. And even more so, just because the version of software that we were hacking on was older, 9 years old at the time, also doesn't make it any less important because people are still relying on, in this case, passwords that they had generated using this version of software. So we know this as security professionals, not everybody upgrades their tools, their software, definitely not their hardware. And just because there is a patched version of something doesn't mean everybody's going to start using it and all of a sudden the world is safe from previous problems. So that was really the main lesson. This project came up where I'd kind of unintentionally gotten involved in kind of cryptocurrency wallet recovery, where I'd hacked. My first kind of project related to that was hacking the Trezor One hardware wallet uh, for a guy that had lost $2 million, or he was locked out of his device. He had $2 million on it, and my wife was like, "You should be filming this process." Because I was just, kind of cranking away on my own in my lab, and so I had a friend of mine who is a filmmaker, film this video as I'm actually hacking it. The customer, this guy, flies from New Jersey to Portland, where I live on the west coast of the US, comes into my house. We do the hack, we record it and everything in real time. So, talking about sort of the live, KernelCon Live, this was a real time process. And it opened up these floodgates. That video went viral. And it was really the first time I feel like we were able to show hacking, or I was able to show hacking, where most of my videos before then were like me with a phone, just trying to get the info out there. But using my filmmaker friends, they were able to tell a very technical story in a really cool way. And at the end of that video, I was like, if you're looking for help with other projects, let me know. Unbeknownst to me, that we would then get thousands of emails from people that were locked out of crypto wallets, that had other data recovery problems, that were scammed. Like, I mean, it's been really interesting because it's sort of broken me out of my hacker bubble into seeing more of the world, where I'd always really just been focused on my community and my people. So it was both good and bad, but I've done a lot more wallet recovery. And one of these projects, a guy had contacted me and said, "Hey, I used this program called RoboForm to generate a password that I then used to protect my Bitcoin Core wallet." And he had generated the password in 2012 or something like that, 2013, or early. Forgot about it for a long time. The value was up when he contacted us, 1.6 million. Right after when we were editing the video, it shot up to 3 million. It was a significant amount of money. And I turned down the project because I was like, well, he's using a password generator. You imagine
Mm.
password generators,
Yeah.
they're security-based products. They're probably generating passwords properly. I gave the benefit of the doubt to the software vendor, which,
Mhm.
talking about earlier at the loft, like, wow, I probably shouldn't have done that. But anyway, I turned it down. And then a year later, he reaches out again. And I remember in my email to him, I'm like, the only way this is possible is if there's some sort of vulnerability in the password generating process. And didn't think anything of it until he contacted me again. And it was like, okay, let's look into this a little bit more. And it does turn out that the way that the passwords were generated with this version, at least up to this version of the RoboForm password generator, was based on system time, and it would seed the pseudo random number generator with system time, do some manipulation of things that was kind of irrelevant, but basically meant that once we reverse engineered this process, we could build a wrapper and generate all possible passwords that could have been generated in that time frame. So we basically, we knew some information about when the customer had set up his wallet. So we just generated lots and lots of passwords, created our word list of these supposedly random passwords that weren't, and then eventually cracked it. So it was pretty eye-opening. And then doing the presentation, and we made a video about that also, which is on YouTube. But when Bruno and I, who's my friend who we did the work together, when we were putting the presentation together, I wanted to really drive home that point of like, look, pseudo-random number generator problems have been known for a long time. Weaknesses with those. Using time as a seed value or in any other way has been known for a long time. So it was less about like, look at this great new thing, and more about here are the problems that exist. Here's how we were able to use them. Here are the tools that we use. Here are things that didn't work. And just showing like these problems are never going to go away. Yeah. They're just going to come up in different ways of different products. But it was super fun. I loved it. And RoboForm, like the vendor response, nowadays you would imagine vendors to be acknowledging of problems and say, okay, yeah, sure, we fixed that. And I couldn't find any prior kind of evidence of them working with hackers before, which is also worrying. Even looking in HackerOne and some bug bounty places, I just couldn't find anything. So I was a little worried about how they're going to react. I wrote up a whole disclosure thing. And even though it was an old version, this was many years earlier, I still thought it was the responsible thing to do and to let them know. And they basically responded and said, oh, we fixed that problem. But they didn't explain how they fixed it. And a journalist actually asked them, how did you fix it? They didn't say. The journalist also asked them, did you notify your customers about this problem if you knew about it? No response. And people that I talked to who had used RoboForm back in the day did not get any sort of email explaining like, hey, we found this problem with how we generated passwords. We've now fixed that by doing XYZ, so you can rely on these passwords more. By the way, if you've used our password generator to generate passwords in the past, you should probably change those, which most people probably wouldn't anyway, but at least the vendor would be doing the right thing. None of that. Basically crickets. So we don't know how that problem was fixed, which in my mind tells me it probably wasn't fixed. It was probably obfuscated in some way that might just need some additional reverse engineering to figure out that vulnerability for more modern versions. So it was a little underwhelming in how, I really honestly wanted to know how they fixed it. Out of curiosity, not because I was going to like try to use that against them. And I think they missed a really good opportunity to have a say in that, especially with the video that we made that has over 1 million views and no input from them. Like it would be really cool if I could have concluded that video of like, this is what they did to fix it. And it's just in this day and age, it's so frustrating how we still have this potential risk of getting sued and this lack of communication between vendors. A lot more vendors are doing it well compared to the Loft and back in the day. But it really surprised me that there was not more of open communication there.
Sometimes it's also cultural and location and geographical. Sometimes they have different perspectives on different things.
Yeah.
But I completely agree that sometimes organizations do want to learn from the different perspectives.
Sure. And why not? I mean, if you're designing a secure product and somebody finds a problem, like why not learn from that?
Absolutely.
The fact that we found it as two hackers hacking on stuff, this is the same story all the time. Like, obviously somebody else is exploiting that. We are not the smartest people in the room, and we are not the only people finding these problems.
Absolutely.
We're just trying to make the world a better place. And you can't just put your head in the sand and imagine these things don't exist. It doesn't work.
No one's looking and no one's discovering. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So what things you're getting up to today? What's new? What's the latest news you've got?
Yeah. So I've been home for the first time in a couple of years. I've been home for more than like 3 weeks. Which is really, really nice. I travel probably 10 or 12 times a year for maybe a week or more at a time. So it is very like, I don't know if the term road warrior is used anymore, but it is definitely like, I feel like I'm on tour and I feel like I'm a one-man band, which I love. I absolutely love it. But I've also discovered that I love having more than 3 weeks so I can really get deep into projects. What I'm working on, surprisingly, or maybe not surprisingly, is when I did the first wallet hacking video with the Trezor 1 that uses an STM32 F205 microcontroller, general purpose microcontroller. I did this fault injection attack to bypass security to get the funds out for this guy. But I was never really comfortable with the approach. And I felt in the back of my head, I felt like there was a better way to do it. And that sort of just stuck with me, and that kind of hacker mindset, like that adversarial thing of like, I can do this better. I know I can do it better. So over the past couple of years, I've been focused on trying to refine that original attack, but make it work across more devices, learn different types of fault injection techniques, build up different platforms and different hardware. And I've been working with a colleague of mine in Belgium on like late night Discord chats about it and really collaborating. That's been so exciting. And to see this incremental progress as we go. And it's very much like a scientific approach to hacking because you're running all these tests, you're making changes, you're looking at results, you're doing all these things. And it's been a long time coming, and we're almost ready to release a whole bunch of information that, again, is not necessarily groundbreaking. It served a purpose for us to learn new techniques and use those techniques, in my case, to help people with cryptocurrency recovery. In his case, he was doing some PhD work and some other projects. But these chips are used in billions of devices all over the place. But really, it's this, I feel like it will be a cool culmination, kind of like the RoboFoam work of showing like, here's what existed, here's what we learned, here's what we made, here's what we iterated on and maybe improved. Here are the problems we ran into. Most importantly, here are the problems we ran into. Here's what we tried. Here's what didn't work. Here's how we overcame these things. So really kind of cover that process. I'm just so excited about it. I don't know where it's going to come out and how it's going to come out. We might make a video about it, but it really like has been such a cool learning experience that I can't even wrap my head around how much I've learned over these past couple of years.
So how do you learn? What is your method?
Yeah, always by doing. I spend a lot of time thinking and writing out my lists of like, let's try this, but it doesn't really click until I do it. So like when my colleague does some tests and gives me some results, I'm like, okay, now I want to replicate that so I learn the right way and make sure that, of course, that my results are the same as his, but also to learn from it. So it's all about doing, which means I make a lot of mistakes, and I'm not afraid to.
Which mistakes are good because it means mistakes are part of the learning process.
They are, and it's something I think a lot of people are embarrassed to talk about. And I actually gave a talk it was Hack in the Box in Thailand last summer about failure. And it was just some examples of failing, because I think especially with the internet and when you go to a conference or you see papers published, that's the end result of what could be a huge amount of work. And it's very easy to get imposter syndrome when you look at stuff like that. And it's like, how did they do that? Are they not making the same mistakes I am? So I think it's important to talk about that.
I think it's one of the crucial things. I've spoken to quite a few people who do the capture the flag and the streaming and showing the walkthroughs, and they show the perfect walkthrough, and you're just like,
yeah.
When I did it, I had my head on the table about 100 times.
Right, and it's funny because now like we have an attack that works, but that's only because of our dozens of failures along the way. And those failures, by the way, just because something didn't work for our attack and our approach and our chip doesn't mean it's not going to work anywhere else. So somebody could take our failures and actually turn those into positive successes on some other project with a different chip. And that's what is so cool about it.
That's one of the important things is about going through this process of documenting everything that you do. And I think that's one of the things that sometimes that people don't realize, the amount of work that goes into just documenting not just the success, but everything that you did, all the steps.
Right. When Bruno and I were doing the software reverse engineering of RoboForm, like I would have a screen capture running. So if I ended up finding something or doing something and I needed to go back and be like, what did I do to cause that outcome? I could actually, just drag back and see what I did. Yeah, the documentation is hugely important, which I love doing from the engineering mindset of like having everything documented properly. We have our Discord chat is a 3-year laboratory notebook, basically. So when we start like writing up this research to give a talk or whatever it is, we have everything kind of documented by time. But it's so important. Like that is really part of the process that helps you as the hacker learn, but also helps other people learn and be able to replicate your work and take that and build on it.
Absolutely. And what resource for anyone in the audience who's looking to get into this? Where would you point them to? What would be taking your course would definitely be one opportunity.
Yeah. Right. So a lot of people. So right. My courses, they cost money. They're at a conference. Conferences charge for those. All of the resources that I use in my training classes are already available on my website in different presentations that I've given over time. The course just kind of makes those into a more defined structure. But on my website, probably the easiest thing is if you go to joegrand.com, that will currently go to a Linktree page. It will eventually just go to kind of a launching point for my various projects and stuff. That will lead you to Grand Idea Studio, which is my engineering company. That's where all of my security work, that's where all of my work is. Most projects I've done are open source. All of my security stuff is out there. So kind of looking through the hardware hacking stuff that's out there. I do have a Discord server also, which is fairly low volume, There's a lot of cryptocurrency like scammers and annoying people on there. But once in a while, we have good technical conversations, and there's a frequently asked questions list in there about how to get involved in hardware hacking. I'm sure there's a lot of places that I'm not involved with on Discord and other forums and stuff for hacking. But I always tell people, like, just find something you're interested in. Like in your case, it was, Proxmark, so RFID. Whatever you're into, Flipper Zero, like maybe you just want to like screw with Tesla, charging ports. And
Charging
that's
ports.
a drug to like doing something else. Find something you're interested in and, maybe go to a thrift store and buy some electronics and tear it apart. But there are definitely a lot of resources now and a lot of tools available now, and it can be overwhelming. So, Discord, my Discord server, there's other people there other than me that will also answer questions and stuff.
Fantastic, yeah, absolutely. And don't, I've burnt my fingertips quite often.
Yeah, I don't even have these anymore. I can't feel my fingers when I get burned. It's like, oh, that just happens.
And I always keep a torch nearby.
Yeah.
I think I've been in the dark quite a few times. Joe, it's been really awesome having you on. It's been a pleasure, talking with you and learning and listening to your journey. And you're definitely, I think for everyone out there, you've probably got so many people into hardware hacking to really kind of, make the world a safer place, including myself. I've watched a lot of your sessions and talks, and I've learned so much from you, and I'm sure the audience will also. So really, if people do want to contact you, what's the best way? If they have questions, is it going to the website, to your Discord? What's the best way to?
Yes, I would say Discord is probably the best way. If you email me, I'll probably not respond to it. I get so many emails that it's been. I used to try to respond to everything, and then when the videos went viral, when it started reaching this outside audience, it became really hard and overwhelming. So a lot of times I just shut everything off and hack on things. So Discord at least is a good asynchronous kind of communication, and then other people can jump in and ask questions too. But yeah, again, I appreciate the opportunity. It's always fun to share this stuff, and especially with people of my generation who sort of, you grew up in a very similar way. I will mention too. So again, the best way, like joegrand.com. What we didn't mention is by the time this podcast comes out, there will be a movie released on February 28th, and this should be coming out afterwards, called Cold Wallet. And it's a cryptocurrency like heist thriller movie. So like an independent film that got picked up, and I think it will be in actual movie theaters and streaming. I don't know for sure because they haven't told us. But I actually have a part in that movie that is as so a character awesome. It's a character pretending to be me, basically. So you'll have to see it, but be on the lookout.
Now it's Joe Grand, the hacker, engineer, and actor.
An actor, yeah. But basically, it's like, it was very fun. Definitely watch it. You're not going to learn anything new, but it's an exciting kind of thing. And to be at a movie is just another one of these examples of like, I have no idea what's going to happen. Like, I just like doing what I do and kind of following my passion. As cheesy as that sounds, like, you can do it, right? You can do what you love, especially in the security space. There's no shortage of paths to go. But that movie for sure was a different introduction into a different world, and fun to put that little hacker bit into it.
Absolutely. I think over the years, even for me, that's what got me really into changing from gaming into hacking was, the back of war games. War games was, sneakers. So hackers. So I think that was, doing what I was doing was the entertaining side of things. But those, really were the things that just swayed me back in again into the hacking side.
Yeah.
And definitely,
you can make real change. You can make real change in positive and in potentially negative ways also.
Which everything has a double edge.
Exactly.
So we'll definitely make sure, for the audience, we're going to make sure I'll put all of those into the show notes, including the link for the movie as well.
Yes.
So that will be it's on my list of movies now to watch in the coming.
I'm assuming they haven't cut my part out, because it did screen at South by Southwest in 2020.
Okay.
I'm assuming it's still in there.
if it was in there, then it definitely should be. So awesome having you on. Looking forward to catching up in the near future. So for the audience, always looking to bring you really thought leaders, educational, information to keep you interested and keep you passionate about making the world a safer place. And if hardware hacking is kind of your path, then hopefully this episode is going to really kind of re-energize yourself into taking a next steps and journey.
Yes.
Tune in every 2 weeks for the podcast. Look forward to talking with you, seeing you in the future, and stay safe and take care. Many thanks.
Cool. See ya.